if I were to suddenly pass away, would my kids know through listening to my music what I was about, and so I just started working on this one song, and I didn't set out to like write, something that would be groundbreaking for me, but it ended up being that. And that line, I am the child, I am the parent,
I am illusion, I am awareness, I am the pain that I didn't take care of, that turned into all of the things that I'm scared of. What do I notice is none of it lasts, same as the lightning and thunder that crash.
I wrote that and I was like, wow, okay, so there's no going back, because that's that's a very like honest, but it felt so liberating to write that. And I appreciated it as an artist also. I was like, damn, that's just a really well-written line. But the caveat was like, wow, that's also devastating. That is like the ultimate vulnerability. Your mom has to hear that, your kids have to hear that. And like, are you prepared? Do you want to share that part of your life?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Love, Loss, and Hallucinations. Really looking forward to my conversation today with my guest, Ofosu Jones-Quartey. Ofosu is a meditation teacher, a hip-hop artist who, in that realm, goes by the name Born I, and an author whose work sits at the intersection of music, mindfulness, and radical self-compassion. He is a teacher and an artist with more than 2 decades of practice. He blends Dharma wisdom with contemporary creative expression to make inner healing accessible to all. His latest projects include the contemplative hip-hop album Komoribe, which, just a little aside, for those of you who love words, I believe this word means sunlight leaking through the trees.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Beautiful word. And his book, Lyrical Dharma, Hip-Hop as Mindfulness. Across retreats, performances, and community gatherings, Ofosu supports people in remembering their inherent worth and how to live with presence and courage. And he's also, within his own life and world, has been dealing with pure OCD. That is also something that adds to the wholeness of who he is. And he is joining us from Washington, D.C. area where he lives with his wife and I believe 4 kids. Is that right?
4 kids. That's right. Yeah.
Wow. That is a full house.
It is a full house. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and I love also, just speaking of children, we were texting earlier and he's like, yeah, I'm all ready for today. I'm just coming from a mindfulness workshop for 5th grade children, where he was also reading from his children's book. But I'm wondering, just first of all, out of the gate, like when you were, say, in your late teens, early 20s, and, I believe we're focused on hip hop and music and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Did you, on any realm, see that in years down the road, you'd be doing mindfulness workshops for 5th graders?
Well, what's interesting is that in my early 20s is when I started teaching in the family mindfulness Sangha or community here in D.C. with the Insight Meditation community of Washington. If anyone's familiar with a wonderful teacher by the name of Tara Brach, who wrote Radical Acceptance and so many other fantastic books. This is a community that she founded, and one of the sort of branches of that community was the family program. And just by a chance encounter with the guy who was teaching that program, his name is Carl Skoglund, I ended up becoming a guest teacher in my early 20s. So did I envision that but it took a long time for me to kind of accept that this was one of my legitimate life paths. At the time, it was something that I felt honored to do as an offering to the community, and somewhat selfishly as a way to have my kids involved in the Dharma in some ways. So or in the world of mindfulness in some ways. Yeah. So it wasn't something at the time that I considered would be, such a deeply ingrained part of my life. But yeah, fast forward many years later,
Yeah.
I'm still up to it. Yeah.
And I'm sure those fifth graders are better off today for it. At least for today,
For today, you'd have to ask them, but I had a
Yeah.
good time. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And I know from reading your book, Lyrical Dharma, here's a copy right here.
Thank
Da-da-da.
you. Thank you.
Yeah. Which, it's a really great book because it's like part memoir, part lyric book, part introduction to meditation and Buddhism, part
Yeah.
reflection on what it means to suffer and be human, all this mixed into this beautifully illustrated work that, you can also, you have a playlist on Spotify. And I don't know if you
Yeah.
have it on Apple Music too, but
Yeah.
where you can like kind of listen along
Mhm.
to the songs that you talk about in the book. And it's just this beautiful combination of art and Buddhism. But just for like people out there, let's just get really basic.
Sure.
Because you mentioned the word Dharma already, and it's in your title.
Yeah.
What is Dharma for those who aren't in the Buddhist kind of
Yeah.
meditation vibe?
Sure. 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 There is a famous Buddhist teacher named Ajahn Chah. Someone asked him one time, "What is the Dharma?" And he basically said there isn't anything that isn't it. And it but what I would say is, conventionally speaking, the Dharma would comprise any teaching that points us to um liberation of our
Mm,
minds and hearts, um, any teaching that points us to a deep and unconditional kind of love for
mm,
ourselves and our fellow beings. Any teaching that points us to love and liberation is Dharma, as far as I see it. The practice of Dharma is to observe our life in such a way that those teachings become a part of everything.
mm,
You can notice Dharma taking out the trash. You can, by seeing the interconnectedness of what goes in must come out. And but we're still a part of everything. We notice that um what we turn into compost, or what we originally think of as garbage, is the foundation for new things to grow. And
mm,
so yeah, so I mean, basically anything can be Dharma. Anything can point us to deeper love and a sense of liberation. Yeah.
mm. Yeah. And along those lines, is there an example from your own life that sort of illustrates that for you think? And I know,
Um,
like, just a little more background on you is, I'm your mom introduced you to Buddhism and meditation when you were 7, and your parents both
yeah,
came from Ghana.
yeah,
So, you were both kind of diving in this fresh and anew.
for sure,
But,
for sure.
so you've been kind of steeped in this since from a young age. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, back to the question of like, for yourself, has there been an experience of experiencing the Dharma that you're like, "Oh, wow, yes, that's it."
Um, yeah, I mean, I think many experiences, and now for me, it is a part of my life in such a way that um I can kind of, you know, derive a Dharma lesson from any little thing.
Mm,
But I think I would say something, a profound moment for me was reading a Buddhist text called the Heart Sutra,
mm,
when I was in my kind of late 20s. And just these words: form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. I don't know if anyone's ever seen The Matrix, and that time, that moment where Neo was just able to like see through everything and just like see the code behind the forms, and
mm,
recognize his own kind of fluidity and immersion with the with everything around him. I don't know. There was just, I think I was just primed in that moment to read those
Mm.
words and for it to have, many, many years later, I still remember that moment. I was on a Greyhound bus to from DC to a show in Baltimore, and it just struck me like a bolt of lightning.
Mm.
Wow, um, I am not the solid singular entity that I think I am. I'm actually more spacious than that. I'm actually connected to more than that.
Mm.
Yeah, and that might be, probably my first experience of something like that. And I was also at Plum Village Monastery a few years ago, playing music and listening to poetry with the monks and nuns up there, and I had a really profound experience of just feeling um, a deep connection with everything and everyone around me, and really going beyond the word interconnected, going beyond the idea of interbeing, as the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh says, and just feeling it, experiencing it. And it, there's a kind of love or a deep affection that arises when I feel that sense of
Mm.
connection. So yeah, just going back to Dharma being this liberatory, loving uh oasis, as it were, that we can draw from.
Mm. Well, and I love just like reflecting on that you had this deep, profound experience on a Greyhound bus. Like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not where you think it's gonna hit you, right? You think it's gonna be like under a tree or on a mountain or
Yeah, no, just reading, it just reading on the bus,
Uh-huh.
and then boom, like, oh my God, yeah, the other experience I think is probably more idyllic. I was at the monastery surrounded by monks and nuns reading poetry. And I think that you would expect maybe to have an experience like that. But
Yeah.
on a cramped Greyhound bus to Baltimore, I definitely had a deep personal experience of the Dharma.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, and, correct or clarify me if I'm off, but, it sounds like it's, on that basic level of, really seeing and experiencing there's like this self, this like meat suit that we're walking around in that we know is us, quote unquote,
Yeah.
but then really connecting to that greater connection to people, animals, plants,
Right.
everything
Yeah.
around in the universe.
Yeah. The self is not just one thing. I think the word I, as in, I am here with you, those words I
Mhm.
and you, or I and mine, they are um stand-ins or symbols or placeholders for a much deeper reality that really can't be expressed in words, or if we tried, we'd never stop. But
Mm.
what they actually point to is not a singular entity, but rather um, a, co- a collective unfolding that has been unfolding since the beginning of the universe, and it includes
Mm.
all the yeah, it includes all of everything. Just you sometimes when I'm offering a meditation, I might ask the people to just notice the feeling of their body making contact with the earth beneath them, and that just this aspect of sitting here, or just being here, there's so much cooperation and generosity that goes into just this act of sitting here. Just sitting
Mm.
here, it is cooperation between your body and the earth. And if we just stop at the body, the amount of cooperation happening within the body between all the different systems, nervous, pulmonary, all of the all of this, musculoskeletal, all of the systems working together to just make a body, and then that body in contact with the earth as a result of collaboration with, or cooperation with the force of gravity, um and then to be able to breathe here is is a cooperation or collaboration with with all the plant life and all life. And so just this simple moment of being is actually an offering of generosity through a cosmic web of
Mm.
collaboration. And that's what we are, you know. We are a cosmic web of collaboration.
Cosmic
um
web of collaboration. I love
yeah.
it. And
Yeah,
even just as you say that, it's just like, how are we not just grateful every second for every breath we have, given
yeah.
all that you just like so encapsulated so well about what goes into each breath that we take, you know?
The opportunity for massive gratitude is always there. Yeah, yeah.
For sure.
Mhm.
Um, well, and just speaking of kind of tying this to music as well is,
Mm,
and I know this has been shown like scientifically, but you know, as a musician, as an artist, as someone who's on stage, creating these spaces where people are having this uh mutual experience of hundreds of people, thousands of people, whatever,
mhm.
within this same area. And there is some sort of energetic connection between not only the audience and the artist, but between audience members themselves,
Right.
that
Yeah.
goes on. That again, I'm just kind of speaking to that whole interconnectedness that we
Yeah.
sometimes take for granted and don't realize.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, folks will say to me after a concert or an offering, you know, thank you for the experience. And I tend to respond, we created that together, you know. It's
Mm-hmm.
and not in the binary of artist and performer, but like you said, all of the different elements, every people being around each other, people, you know, verbally or non-verbally giving off energy, you know,
Yeah.
and creating this collective moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm I'm going to quote Alice Walker, the author of The Color
Yeah.
Purple, who wrote the
Mhm.
foreword to your book, Lyrical
Yeah.
Dharma, and that I know next to nothing about hip hop, even though I'm in the music business. So just
Yeah.
bear with me.
Sure.
um, but, you know, also from reading your book, just looking at where you are now as far as using hip hop as mindfulness and
Mhm.
weaving these messages of meditation and Buddhism into your songs and your work. That's kind of like, you took hip hop and you've taken it in this direction that at least again, I'm not a student of hip hop, so I'm
Yeah.
not aware of like a lot of other artists taking it in that direction.
Sure.
Um, that said, I'm wondering if, as you were growing up in DC and your parents were from Ghana and, you didn't quite fit the mold of what was happening in DC at the
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
time. And
yeah,
there was sort of a loss of a sense of belonging, I think it sounds like, as a
yeah,
child.
definitely.
Um, Looking back, I'm just curious, did that help you like forge this path on your own going forward? Cause you knew how to kind of just like weave into things.
Mm. Yeah, I think what became I have what I kind of feel like is a classic first generation American, you know,
Mm,
immigrant story where there's the both and of too much and not enough, or just not enough,
mm.
not enough, not enough. and and there is a pain there. There is a identity, a pain around identity, existential trauma that exists there. But then it gives way to a kind of liberation for me that um, there isn't a presumed identity that I fall into, but that it's really you get to kind of see how identity is a construct, you know,
Right.
um, and in Buddhism, one of the marks of existence is that there's no inherent quality to anything, you know, that the qualities that exist in a particular in anything that we're observing are provisional, temporary, etc. So there's no inherent there's nothing about hip hop that says it also can't be a vehicle for spiritual expression. And there were
Mm.
a good amount of where I did find community was in the artists I was listening to and the people who enjoyed listening to those artists. And that's where I did begin to find a sense of belonging was through hip hop. And there were definitely artists for instance, in the Wu-Tang Clan family tree. Um, Artists like the RZA himself, who's the founding member of the Wu-Tang Clan, who definitely was weaving in and out, not I guess as not as deliberate as I tend to, but
Hmm.
for sure, Eastern philosophy is deeply interwoven into what Wu Tang was doing, and they were my favorite group as I was growing up. And artists like Killer Priest, who was, it wasn't necessarily Eastern philosophy that was embedded in his work, but it was just so overtly spiritual and so undeniably dope
Mm.
that, like, that was the sort of standard that I wanted to carry forward. People like Nas, who have a spiritual element to their work, but they also are deeply committed to the craft of making music, of
Mm.
writing lyrics, of being MCs. Rakim, a pioneer of having wisdom and knowledge infused in the lyrics, but also just making sure that the lyrics were delivered and constructed in almost a scientific way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had these influences growing up, and the friends that I made in the hip hop communities, we were just kids in the mall banging on lunch tables, and battling each other in the food courts and stuff. But it was a special time, and yeah, I did find that the hip hop itself is kind of like a rebellion. People might forget or might not know that hip hop itself was a rebellion
Mm.
towards music norms,
Yeah.
and sampling and not necessarily singing, but using just rhythmic delivery of words, and the subject matter, all of those things. People didn't associate that with music at first, and it took a while for hip hop to even be considered a viable musical art form. So even that kind of dismantling of the construct of what is music,
Hmm. Mm.
was a guide for me, as a kid who came up listening to hip hop. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, wow. Well, and what a journey then. And, just um some of the lines and the stanzas in your songs are just so powerful. It's
You.
in the song, in the moment, yeah, you write and sing. I'm the pain that I didn't take care of that turned me into all of the things that I'm scared of.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so hits right on the nose for I feel like
Mhm.
what so many humans and obviously yourself experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that line is the line that song is the song that really kicked off this journey for me.
Mm.
Um, During the pandemic, I when I when I first started doing when I releasing music professionally, I was in a group called Shambhala, and we were making sort of Eastern philosophy, Afro Eastern philosophical, super lyrical hip hop. But
Mm.
I think at the time a lot of it was for me. Um, Expressing the excitement from what I was learning through books and minimal experience, and
Mhm.
so I went on my own journey of twists and turns in the music industry for years, in electronic music, and trying to break into the mainstream hip hop industry, and all of the kind of like personal compromises of integrity and time and all kinds of
Oh
things to
yeah.
just try to make it, you know. And the pandemic happened, and I was just like, you know, am I really doing what I want to do, and am I doing
Mm,
what if I were to suddenly pass away, would my kids know through listening to my music what I was about, you know? And so I just started working on this one song, you know. And I didn't set out to like write, you know, something that would be groundbreaking for me, but it ended up being that. And that line, you know, I am the child, I am the
I am the
parent, I
parent,
am
I am illusion, I am awareness, I am the pain that I didn't take care of that turned into all of the things that I'm scared of. What do I notice is none of it lasts, same as the lightning and thunder that crash. All of the thoughts
I
yeah.
wrote that and I was like, wow, okay, so there's no going back, you know, because that's 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 a very like honest, and but it felt so liberating to write that. And I appreciated it as an artist also. I was like, damn, that's just a really well written line. But the caveat was like, wow, that's also devastating. You know, that is like the ultimate vulnerability. Your mom has to hear that, your kids have to hear that. And like, are you
Mm,
prepared? Do you want to share that part of your life? And I think, and so the decision to keep writing after that, the next lines after that, and then all the songs that have followed that, I think it comes from that one moment. It was a pivotal moment of like,
mm,
okay, is this, because I just didn't think it was like you'd let out something, you say something from the heart. I know I would just be lying and pretending if I shifted away from that place, you know. So
mm.
yeah, so we've just been going deeper since then. But my life it hasn't been so it's challenging, but it hasn't been, it's also grown, you know, things
Hmm.
have and changed. So there's also moments of joy to write about. And
Mm.
yeah, there's other stuff to write about too.
Yeah, and you definitely like I think like you just put out the video um for, hopefully I'll say her name right, Ayana.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Ayana. Yeah.
which a beautiful like just love song, song of
Yeah.
gratitude.
Yeah.
Video is very beautiful, and you
Thank
can
you.
just see the connection and love between you two in the video.
Yeah.
Aesthetically, well, just it's very like calming actually to watch that video.
Yeah. Thank you.
um, but quickly, just before we move on to kind of the love, you
Yeah, yeah,
also
yeah.
you also write in your book, sharing from the heart is both terrifying and healing, as you were alluding to. So how, like, whether it's in the moment or um some of your other songs, how has that been healing for you to share from the heart?
Yeah. You know, it's been, I think it's just been necessary um to free myself
Mm,
from the wish that I should have known better, or could have done better, or
mm,
you know, in certain ways that, you know, I just wasn't skillful, and was harmful to myself and harmful to others at times. And to hold on to those feelings, and then to also discover that I was really dealing with some significant mental health challenges at the time, and
mm,
that
mhm.
was really behind a lot of sort of the self-destructive stuff that was happening.
Yeah.
um you know, just as an act of compassion for myself, and as an act of witnessing my life, and just freeing myself from holding on to things I don't need to hold on to anymore. But then also realizing that it could potentially be beneficial to others
Mhm.
to hear somebody who is a teacher, for instance. You know, like as much as I hold that title kind of lightly because I still feel like that I'm a student. I know that people also hold me as a teacher, and I think it's important for someone who's like in the front of the room, so to speak, to let people know about their humanity, to let people
For
know
sure.
that um, it can be a real struggle, but that doesn't have to be the end of the story. That doesn't have to be the whole story. So also being able to share some of these stories from my life, and to be honest in that way, it it I didn't realize it at the time, but it meant that these things had risen to the surface in such a way that I was just at the point of being able to be free from identifying with them so hard,
Mm,
so tightly. And so it is a kind of liberation to be able to just say, yeah, this is painful, this is hard, or this has been painful, this has been hard. um but it's not like lurking in my subconscious anymore. It's up, I see it, and I'm working with it.
mm,
And so yeah, so it's it's definitely not easy, but it's also pretty liberating
yeah.
when I'm able to speak on those things.
Yeah, so it sounds like by acknowledging it, by putting it out there, um, it loses some of its grasp
Mm,
on you, if not a
yeah.
lot of its grasp.
Yeah. It's not like a boogeyman lurking in the
Yeah,
background. Yeah, it's like it's
yeah.
out. You shine some light on it, and usually poof, it goes away. It's not nowhere near as substantial as you made it out to be.
Yeah. And how has the reaction to those sorts of songs been, whether it's from your family or your community, or not even your songs, but also talking about it?
Yeah.
And I say that both as, you know, I think as us being men and,
Yeah.
certainly men are not encouraged from a young age to like share these sorts of
Mhm.
things,
Yeah.
as well as in, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I wouldn't imagine the hip hop community, this is like something that is, you
Yeah.
know, the first thing people go to when they're writing hip hop.
Yeah. I mean, I think more and more you're finding artists who are wanting to be vulnerable and wanting
Mhm,
to share from the heart. But when that happens, I think the response is still one of like, oh, okay, wow, this is not the norm, but I think it's becoming more normalized, which I which
mhm,
I really love. The response has been really beautiful.
mm,
It's like I think the resonance that I wanted to make with audiences when I was trying to kind of game the system and just convince everybody that I was a dope rapper, I think that ironically or counterintuitively, just being completely myself has
mm,
been and just and be and laying out on the table what's hard for me, what I'm struggling with, or what a triumph is for me, and what I'm grateful for, those types of things. Yeah, people tend to really resonate that with that, and just appreciate seeing some of their own life patterns reflected in what I'm talking about. We're all humans,
mhm,
and we're more alike than we are different. And I don't think that it does anybody a service to present um well, it might. I mean, I know that there's been this movement calling for more utopian art, to give people something to aspire to. So it, I don't think that I'm necessarily the person to do a completely utopian view of to life through my music, but rather something that feels present and alive and real in this moment.
mm. Yeah, and, it just, again, kinda strikes me as, like, not only are you helping to liberate yourself from some suffering on some level, but others
Yeah.
who are able to, like, uh, connect, to go back to what we were talking to at the beginning of
Yeah.
this interconnection, connect and, reflect themselves in you and, "Oh, I'm not alone. This person is
Yeah.
also experiencing this. This person's also seeing this."
Yeah,
Um,
there was just a quick story.
yeah.
I was doing a performance in Boulder, Colorado, and I did a Q&A at the end of it, and there was a gentleman there who said they stumbled upon my song in this moment, the one that you were quoting,
Mm.
and when they were at a really, really low point, dealing with drug addiction, et cetera, and they had lost a ton of weight, and they were just, kind of at death's door, and that they listened to my song every day, multiple times a day, as like a way of they had other systems of support there, but the song was kind of a soundtrack for them to
Mm.
kind of pull themselves through that dark time. And that song is definitely about me trying to pull myself through a dark time, or just even just like kind of reaching out to the universe, asking for help to get me through a dark time. And then he says, he now is he one of his jobs is he drives around and finds people who are, or picks people up who are like needing to go to rehab, or or who are in a really tough situation when it comes to substance abuse, and that
Mm.
he plays that song for them
Oh,
as
wow.
they're driving on the way to rehab, or in from here and there. And so it's just become a part of his life, and how he works with others. And you write a song, you put it out, there's no I and that's been a part of his life for years now, and
Mm.
had no idea. And he got a chance to meet me and tell me that. And um really, really special. I was really scared
Wow.
when I was most scared when I wrote that song, that my parents would hear this and they would know that I had a problem with addiction and depression, and that it would be embarrassing for them. But I just felt like the good outweighed the bad in that sense. And a story like that kind of really h- helps to prove that point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it does. And, it's just shows that being authentic as you were and vulnerable can just blossom into these amazing gifts that you have for yourself, for other people, that
Mm,
you can't predict, but
you
it's just
cannot.
waiting to
Yeah.
be watered, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. You referenced a little earlier, that you have had your own like mental health struggles, and
Mhm.
I know a couple years ago you were diagnosed with pure OCD.
Yes.
And I guess again, for those out there listening, like what does that mean? And
Yeah.
because I wasn't familiar with that type of OCD before I read
Yeah.
about it from you.
Yeah.
And how have all your practices sort of
Sure.
that helped
Yeah.
handle that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, when I wrote in this moment, I still hadn't been diagnosed. And so some of the suffering I was talking about was intertwined with that. And it took a couple more years for me to um talk with a therapist specifically about this experience. I had a bit of an inkling that I might be living with OCD. One of my daughters was diagnosed with it, and
Mm.
my oldest daughter, and she suggested to me that I should just really focus on this and see what somebody says. And yeah, that as I was talking with the therapist and sharing my symptoms, within a minute of sharing what my experience had been, she said, "Well, yeah, well, let me read you what the clinical definition of pure OCD is." And so OCD is a wide ranging sort of mental health disorder that that can manifest inwardly, outwardly, and both. Um,
Mm.
for people who live with pure O, it manifests in the form of uncontrollable, debilitating,
Mm.
intrusive thoughts, and they are thoughts that sort of attack um, the core of who you are, what you believe in, what you hold sacred. And so everything that you love, everything that you care about, your mind will produce thoughts at an alarming rate and with alarming intensity that undermine the that undermine your love or undermine your
Mm,
care, and really create for me a state of tremendous anxiety and tremendous shame. Whenever I was around anything and anyone that I loved, I was always on high alert for my mind screaming at me the opposite, or showing me images in the opposite, or
mm,
um and the cycle would just, would be kind of bracing against a mental event that was going to be really hard to deal with and really hard to reconcile. And
mm,
so you're just kind of always anxious, so you develop a generalized anxiety that you live with all the time, and that also creates a lot of like physical tension in the body. And so, throughout the day, you're just trying to, from the moment, speaking for myself, from the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, there's just trying to manage your mind. And as a meditator, as a meditation practitioner, there was so much imposter syndrome, shame, and then a more heightened intensity with these episodes, because
mm.
I am developing familiarity with my mind, but the thing that my mind usually wants to show me or express are just like the worst things, so
Right, you're not
um
running from it, you're actually sitting and intentionally, like, looking at it so you can't
constantly,
avoid it.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
there's no way to get out of it. And getting a diagnosis, and so pure O typically manifests silently. No one can really see on the outside that you are dealing with this, but it's the managing and checking and bracing and recovering and experiencing shame and anxiety, all those things. It's all happening
Mhm.
inside, but it can sort of lead to um sort of a secondary behavior is to try to mitigate it, like drinking, or like alcohol, like substance abuse, or
Right.
self-medicating, as we might call it, just to not experience it anymore, just to give your brain a break. And I was definitely doing that.
Mm.
And so talking with the therapist was so cathartic, to be like, oh my gosh, this thing has a name. And like, I'm not the only person who, because it's very isolating, because it's just so personal. And so knowing that, fast forward, again, I thought that I would just have to work on it through therapy, but it had been such a lifelong condition that
Mhm.
I decided to consider taking medication to help me manage my symptoms. And that was super, super humbling, as a man, as a Black person, as a rapper, as all my identities, as a dad, as all of it was just like, wow, I'm this weak. That was like the
Mm.
the subtle thought, but I didn't choose to have this condition. I just like,
Right.
I didn't cook up some mental illness in my brain when the universe was putting me together, so and if I did, I don't remember doing that. So um I had to have some compassion for myself. I had to think about,
Yeah.
what would I say to a friend in the same situation. I would say, do everything you can to take care of yourself. And why am I exempt from every avenue of care that's available to me? So, yeah, I've been taking medication to manage my symptoms. And between that and therapy, just sort of designing my life in such a way where my spiritual practice, my art, my life as a father and a husband, all of it is just one thing now,
Mm.
and so,
Mhm.
and that takes away the stress of having to put on a different version of myself every time I'm doing something else. I just get to be me through and through all these different facets, and that tames the anxiety. So it's not just therapy, not just medication, but it's also
Mhm.
changing my approach to meditation, changing just an entire lifestyle change to
Mm.
support my mental health. So all of that is to say is, while I wouldn't wish my OCD on anybody, it definitely has nudged my life into a space where the way that I care for this condition is also just how I care for my life in general.
Mm.
And I appreciate the care that I'm taking with my life right now. So um
Mm.
So yeah, so as Thich Nhat Hanh said, no mud, no lotus.
No. Well, it sounds, as far as the way you're approaching your life now, that it's really made you level up your own self-compassion.
Yeah. I mean, self-compassion to me is the way. And I think it's the way.
Mhm.
I'll make a magnanimous statement that I think self-compassion is the way to heal the world. You know,
Mm.
if
Mhm.
if each of us could work on the project of loving ourselves, we wouldn't have time to hurt each other. You know, because it's a lifelong, it's a lifelong journey as far as
Yeah.
I have experienced. You know, and loving yourself means loving the aspects of your being that you didn't sign up for, you didn't ask for, that you've inherited from your parents and their parents, and all that has been a part of what has manifested you. You are taking responsibility for all of those things and doing your best to add some healing to that. It's a I think, you know, we wouldn't have free time to be beating each other up, you know.
Yeah.
We would, and and we would see, and it wouldn't necessarily, it hasn't been exhausting for me, you know, to learn. It's been a learning process to learn to accept and love myself, but it's been liberating every step of the
Mhm.
way. It's made me it's impacted, I would say that it's impacted all of my relationships for the better.
Yeah.
But primarily the relationship I have with myself. And it's just this simple reflection. What would I say to a friend or a loved one in this same situation, you know, whatever the situation is, from the mundane to the terrible to the magnificent. How would I treat a friend who was going through this? And developing that inner friendship really helps catch me when I'm
Mm.
falling into anything, you know.
Yeah.
So I just feel so strongly about self-compassion, and it's become the cornerstone of what I like to teach and talk and write and rap about.
I love all of that, and yeah, it's, I think a lot of people can immediately react to, "Oh, self-compassion, self-love is like this, oh, that's selfish woo-woo weirdness.
Ah,
What are you
yeah.
talking about?" And, as well as countering, or not countering, but also that critical voice, whether you have OCD or not, or,
Yeah.
imposter syndrome, like, I feel like so much of the world has that.
Yeah.
And I as you're saying, what self-compassion and what self-love points to is, if you're feeling good about yourself and you're not projecting your pain and hurt onto other people as so many people do,
Yeah.
you're going to be better. Your relationships are going to be better. Uh, the world, as you have said, is going to be
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, that's my theory, and I think that my theory has shaken out so far, to be true in my own life, and so
Mm,
that, you know,
mhm.
all I have are my experiences, my direct experiences to go by, and it wasn't until I took on the practice, because with, you know, as a, you know, self is kind of a controversial word in Buddhism.
Right.
Um, but if you understand self to not be a singular thing, but to be a contact point throughout the web of the universe, then you understand that self-compassion is just a gateway to offering compassion to everything, you know, and you can, and mindfulness, there's an implied or embedded practice of mindfulness in the practice of self-compassion, because it involves looking at our lives. It involves taking a moment to pause and ask yourself, how do you feel right now?
Mm,
How's it going for me right now?
mhm.
And that is a moment of mindfulness, and then responding with kindness. You know, then you're introducing a new, something often counterintuitive way of relating to yourself that becomes interesting, becomes eye-opening, becomes challenging sometimes, but becomes something that you just work on, and then it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I don't I just you don't even have it in you to be. Now, I'm not saying that I'm exemplary. I'm just it's just it makes it easier to apologize, like if you've made
Mm.
for me,
Hmm.
because it's like, hey, I'm not considering that I'm not a fallible human being. Let's consider that to be the front, the beginning of the conversation. And so I know that through offering myself grace, that it's something I have to do a lot. So I don't have a problem saying I'm sorry or letting someone know from the front end that, hey, I don't know everything about this, or I might not get this right, because I'm not trying to protect an imaginary version of myself, So,
Oh.
um, yeah, I just think that it is a jeweled doorway, if we
Love that.
that we can walk through, if we have the inkling to just be a little bit more kind to ourselves.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the practice of, oh, how would I react if this was a friend having this situation?
Yeah.
You've mentioned, admitting to yourself and others that you're fallible and being willing to apologize. Is there any other like simple first, not simple, but relatively easy first steps that people can start to walk down that path of to get through that jeweled doorway, as you called it?
Yeah. Another something that was really helpful for me that all of a sudden I'm starting to do again. I thought it was just going to be I would be one and done, but when I was in the throes of depression, um something that I would do after a meditation was I would just write a letter to myself.
Mm,
It could be quick. I would just like scribble, and a lot of times I would just say, dear Ofosu, I know that you are really struggling right now, and I'm proud of you for trying. Just like something like
mhm.
that. And so if anybody is and I don't think I ever really went back and read any of those. It just felt good to acknowledge myself in that way,
Yeah.
and so that can be another practice that can be nourishing. It doesn't have to be lifelong. I think sometimes we do stuff and it's like, oh, am I going to do this forever? But inspired by the monks on the walk for peace. I have been writing every once in a while when I wake up, today will be my peaceful day, those types of things. I just enjoy starting the day like that. It's not the same as writing like an encouraging letter to myself, but I think just maybe writing a few kind words to yourself could be another path. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I love that.
I really just highly recommend this simple reflection. What would I say to a friend who was in my shoes right now? Um, and to try to do that not only when it's really tough, but when it's mundane, when you're taking out the trash or
Mm,
heating up egos, or when
mhm.
you're just to develop this kind of inner companionship, the way that a friend can just be hanging out in the kitchen when you make a snack, and it's just nice to have them there. It's not, you
Yeah.
know, and yeah, yeah. So just I think the path of inner friendship is what I hope to encourage. Yeah.
Yeah. The path of inner friendship. Yeah. And yeah, I love the whole, writing yourself a note of as you were in the ways you were saying. And I actually was reading something, they've done some scientific studies around that. And it's, again, it's that thing of acknowledgement, and your brain doesn't know whether you're telling a piece of paper this or an actual human, really. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
acts
Yeah.
in the same way. But yeah, let's all give ourselves some self-compassion, some self-friendship,
Yeah.
and keep walking towards that jeweled doorway,
Yes.
liberating each other and ourselves from suffering. And Fosu, this was been a wonderful discussion, I'm
Thank
really
you. Yeah,
glad
yeah, yeah.
we had, he was off to see the monks when we first had this
Yes.
lined up, and he was like a frozen icicle apparently
Oh
afterwards.
my
I'm like, let's
gosh.
wait, let's come back.
Thank you. Thank you for the path of outer friendship there, because we were just right next to, I think the state capitol is right by the water in Annapolis, and
Oh,
it wasn't that cold of a day outside. As soon as I got out of that area, it was like, oh, what was going on? But I think just the air, the air from the water, and there was still snow everywhere. And we had been standing outside for hours. So I was just a popsicle by that time. So
but it
thank
sounds
you
like it
for
was
the
an
flexibility.
inspiration though.
Oh my gosh. It was, I'm so happy I had that experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Very
Mhm.
cool. Well, thanks again for your authenticity, and everyone go check out his book. Check him out on all your streaming
Yeah.
platforms under Born I. Is there any place else people should go to check?
Sure. If you've got Instagram, my Instagram is at Born I Music, BORN, the letter I Music. If you have the internet, you can go to my website, which is bornimusic.com. And all my stuff is there as well. So
yeah. And again, I'd recommend checking out his most recent music video, Ayana. It's just beautiful and really touching. And yeah, we didn't really get a chance to get kind of deep into the love of relationships.
We can have another conversation.
We'll have to have another conversation. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Love
okay.
that.
Now, did you? I'm curious about the premise of your show. You wanted to ask me a hallucination question. Is that right?
Oh, well, I was going to kind of let that slide because we're almost down to time here. But I was going to ask you, is there a hallucination or something, however you want to take that word, that you have experienced in the last years or in your life that you has taught you something?
Yeah. So I think it's a pretty Buddhist answer, but the hallucination that I am just me. The hallucination that I am a single entity, and so it's interesting because that feels like the sort of rational, that doesn't feel like a hallucination, and the experience of that breaking apart, I think that experience that I had at Plum Village, where it's like, oh my God, I'm not a person. I'm not just one person. I looked up and I was the leaves also, and I was the birds also, and I was the monks that were chanting, and I was also the ground everything was sitting on. It wasn't like a super ego moment. It was like just a dispersal of emerging and dispersal of energy everywhere. And it was just, and I felt so totally connected. And so that almost feels like a hallucination experience, but it actually was a wake up from the hallucination, or from the imagination, or from the imagining that I'm just one thing.
Right.
And
I love that.
Yeah. And an experience of a deeper kind of oneness. So yeah, I just wanted to share that. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah. If you have one more minute, one more speed question, what are you loving right now?
What am I loving right now? I am loving my family. I'm loving my family. Okay, couple things. I'm loving my family. I am loving all of the musical and artistic collaborators I'm working with. I'm loving how I'm kind of blending the ease of spiritually minded clothing, or like clothing that can support meditation, and blending that just as a fashion expression. That's something that I've been up to recently. And I'm loving these new projects that I am starting to work on. So, yeah.
Be on the lookout for those.
Yeah,
I love it.
Mhm.
And I'm loving how you just sort of started glowing as you started talking about all of that. So
Yeah, thank you.
awesome. Well, thanks again. And I look forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely. Appreciate you, Scott.
And thanks everyone out there for listening. Definitely go check out what Born Eye is up to. It is inspiring, it is grounding, and it is just pretty cool. So next week, my guest will be Tiffany Shlain. Tiffany Shlain is a multidisciplinary artist and documentarian from here in the San Francisco Bay Area. She currently has a collaborative exhibition with her husband, Ken Goldberg, at the De Rosa Center for Contemporary Arts in San Francisco, titled Ancient Wisdom for a Future Ecology, Trees, Time, and Technology, which you should go check out if you live in the Bay Area. It is there till April 11th. We'll be talking all about that and a lot more. I have known Tiffany from a time long ago, from a place not too far away, though. So we'll get into that story too. Anyway, until next time, have a wonderful week.